designed by Julius Hatry. 109. World media reported on these efforts, including Universal Newsreel of the US, causing immense global public attention. The Great Depression led to an end of the Apollo program, but Max Valier continued the efforts. After switching from solid fuel to liquid fuel rockets, he died while testing and is considered the first fatality of the dawning space age. In 1929, Jimmy Doolittle developed instrument flight. 1928 issue of Popular Aviation, now Flying magazine, which became the largest aviation magazine with a circulation of 100,000. 110. 1929 also saw the first flight of by far the largest plane ever built until then, the Dornier 2X, with a wingspan of 48 m. On its 70th test flight on 21 October 1929, there were 169 people on board, a record that was not broken for 20 years. Less than a decade after the development of the first practical rotorcraft of any type with the autogyro, in the Soviet Union, Boris N. Yuriev and Alexei M. Chemukhin, two aeronautical engineers working at the Tsetralny Aerodynamic Institute, constructed and flew Tsagi-1E, a single-rotor helicopter, which used an open tubing framework, a four-blade main rotor, and twin sets of 1.8 meter, 5.9 feet, diameter anti-torque rotors, one set of two at the nose and one set of two at the tail. Powered by two M2 power plants, uprated copies of the known monosoupape rotary radial engine of World War I. The Tsagi-1E made several successful low-altitude flights. By the 14th of August, 1932, Chemukhin managed to get the 1E up to an unofficial altitude of 605 meters, 1,985 feet, with what is likely to be the first successful single-lift rotor helicopter design ever tested and flown. Only 5 years after the German Dornier 2X had flown, Tupolev designed the largest aircraft of the 1930s era, the Maxim Gorky, in the Soviet Union by 1934, as the largest aircraft ever built using the Junkers methods of metal aircraft construction. In the 1930s, development of the jet engine began in Germany and in Britain. Both countries would go on to develop jet aircraft by the end of World War II. First female combat pilot, Sabi Hagagson, reviews her Breguet 19 after enrolling in the Military Aviation Academy in Eskisa in 1936 and undertaking training at the 1st Aircraft Regiment. Sabi Hagagson flew fighter and bomber planes, becoming the first Turkish female aviator and the world's first female combat pilot. During her flying career, she achieved some 8,000 hours, 32 of which were combat missions. 111, 112, 113, 114, World War II, 1939, 1945. World War II saw a great increase in the pace of development and production, not only of aircraft but also the associated flight-based weapon delivery systems. Air combat tactics and doctrines took advantage. Large-scale strategic bombing campaigns were launched, fighter escorts introduced, and the more flexible aircraft and weapons allowed precise attacks on small targets with dive bombers, fighter bombers, and ground attack aircraft. New technologies like radar also allowed more coordinated and controlled deployment of air defense. The first jet aircraft to fly was the Heinkel He-178, Germany, flown by Erich Warsitz in 1939, followed by the world's first operational jet aircraft, the Me-262, in July 1942, and world's first jet-powered bomber, the Aradu R-234, in June 1943. British developments, like the Gloucester Meteor, followed afterwards, but saw only brief use in World War II. The first cruise missile, V-1, the first ballistic missile, V-2, the first and to date only, operational rocket-powered combat aircraft Mi-163 with attained velocities of up to 1,130 km forward/h, 700 miles per hour, in test flights and the first vertical takeoff manned point defense interceptor, the Mi-262, world first operational jet fighter back MBA-349 latter, were also developed by Germany. However, jet and rocket aircraft had only limited impact due to the late introduction, fuel shortages, the lack of experienced pilots and the declining war industry of Germany. Not only airplanes, but also helicopters saw rapid development in the Second World War, with the introduction of the Focke-Gullis Fa-223, the Flettner FL-282 Syncropter in 1941 in Germany and the Sikorsky R-4 in 1942 in the USA. Post-war era, 1945-1979. DH Comet, the world's first jet airliner. As in this picture, it also saw RAF service. A 1945 newsreel covering various firsts in human flight after World War II. Commercial aviation grew rapidly, using mostly ex-military aircraft to transport people and cargo. This growth was accelerated by the glut of heavy and super-heavy bomber airframes like the B-29 and Lancaster that could be converted into commercial aircraft. The DC-3 also made for easier and longer commercial flights. The first commercial jet airliner to fly was the British de Havilland Comet. By 1952, the British state airline BOAC had introduced the Comet into scheduled service. While a technical achievement, the plane suffered a series of highly public failures, as the shape of the windows led to cracks due to metal fatigue. The fatigue was caused by cycles of pressurization and depressurization of the cabin and eventually led to catastrophic failure of the plane's fuselage. By the time the problems were overcome, other jet airliner designs had already taken to the skies. USSR's Aeroflot became the first airline in the world to operate sustained regular jet services on the 15th of September, 1956 with the Tupolev Tu-104. The Boeing 707 and DC-8, which established new levels of comfort, safety and passenger expectations, ushered in the age of mass commercial air travel. Dubbed the Jet Age. In October 1947, Chukyuja took the rocket-powered Bell X-1 through the sound barrier. Although anecdotal evidence exists that some fighter pilots may have done so while dive-bombing ground targets during the war, this was the first controlled, level flight to exceed the speed of sound. Further barriers of distance fell in 1948 and 1952 with first jet crossing of the Atlantic and the first non-stop flight to Australia. The 1945 invention of nuclear bombs briefly increased the strategic importance of military aircraft in the Cold War between East and West. Even a moderate fleet of long-range bombers could deliver a deadly blow to the enemy, so great efforts were made to develop countermeasures. At first, the supersonic interceptor aircraft were produced in considerable numbers. By 1955, most development efforts shifted to guided surface-to-air missiles. However, the approach diametrically changed when a new type of nuclear carrying platform appeared that could not be stopped in any feasible way, intercontinental ballistic missiles. The possibility of these was demonstrated in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik 1 by the Soviet Union. This action started the space race between the nations. In 1961, the sky was no longer the limit for manned flight, as Yuri Gagarin orbited once around the planet within 108 minutes, and then used the descent module of Vostok I to safely re-enter the atmosphere under reduced speed from Mach 25 using friction and converting the kinetic energy of the velocity into heat. The United States responded by launching Alan Shepard into space on a suborbital flight in a Mercury space capsule. With the launch of the Alouette I in 1963, Canada became the third country to send a satellite into space. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union would ultimately lead to the landing of men on the Moon in 1969. In 1967, the X-15 set the airspeed record for an aircraft at 4,534 miles per hour, 7,297 kilometers per hour, or Mach 6.1. Aside from vehicles designed to fly in outer space, this record was renewed by X-43 in the 21st century. Apollo 11 lifts off on its mission to land a man on the Moon. The Harrier jump jet, often referred to as just Harrier or the jump jet, is a British-designed military jet aircraft capable of vertical forward/short takeoff and landing, v/STOL, via thrust vectoring. It first flew in 1969. The same year that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the Moon, and Bing unveiled the Boeing 747, and the aerospace shaleback Concorde supersonic passenger airliner had its maiden flight. The Boeing 747 was the largest commercial passenger aircraft ever to fly, and still carries millions of passengers each year, though it has been superseded by the Airbus A380, which is capable of carrying up to 853 passengers. In 1975, Aeroflot started regular service on the Tu-144, the first supersonic passenger plane. In 1976, British Airways and Air France began supersonic service across the Atlantic, with Concorde. A few years earlier, the SR-71 Blackbird had set a record for crossing the Atlantic in under 2 hours, and Concorde followed in its footsteps. In 1979, the Gossamer Albatross became the first human-powered aircraft to cross the English Channel. This achievement finally saw the realization of centuries of dreams of human flight. Digital age, 1980-present. Concorde, G-Borg, in storage at London Heathrow Airport following the end of all Concorde flying. This aircraft flew for 22,296 hours between its first flight in 1976 and final flight in 2000. The last quarter of the 20th century saw a change of emphasis. No longer was revolutionary progress made in flight speeds, distances and materials technology. This part of the century instead saw the spreading of the digital revolution both in flight avionics and in aircraft design and manufacturing techniques. In 1986, Dick Rutan and Gina Yager flew an aircraft, the Rutan Voyager, around the world unrefueled, and without landing. In 1999, Bertrand Piccard became the first person to circle the Earth in a balloon. Digital fly-by-wire systems allow an aircraft to be designed with relaxed static stability. Initially used to increase the maneuverability of military aircraft such as the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, this is now being used to reduce drag on commercial airliners. The U.S. Centennial of Flight Commission was established in 1999 to encourage the broadest national and international participation in the celebration of 100 years of powered flight. 115, it publicized and encouraged a number of programs, projects and events intended to educate people about the history of aviation. 21st century. 21st century aviation has seen increasing interest in fuel savings and fuel diversification, as well as low-cost airlines and facilities. Additionally, much of the developing world that did not have good access to air transport has been steadily adding aircraft and facilities, though severe congestion remains a problem in many up-and-coming nations. Around 20,000 city pairs, 116, are served by commercial aviation, up from less than 10,000 as recently as 1996. There appears to be newfound interest, 117, in returning to the supersonic era whereby waning demand in the turn of the 20th century made flights unprofitable, as well as the final commercial stoppage of the Concorde due to reduced demand following a fatal accident and rising costs. At the beginning of the 21st century, digital technology allowed subsonic military aviation to begin eliminating the pilot in favor of remotely operated or completely autonomous unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. In April 2001, the unmanned aircraft Global Hawk flew from Edwards AFB in the US to Australia non-stop and unrefueled. This is the longest point-to-point flight ever undertaken by an unmanned aircraft and took 23 hours and 23 minutes. In October 2003, the first totally autonomous flight across the Atlantic by a computer-controlled model aircraft occurred. UAVs are now an established feature of modern warfare, carrying out pinpoint attacks under the control of a remote operator. Major disruptions to air travel in the 21st century included the closing of US airspace due to the September 11 attacks, and the closing of most of European airspace after the 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull. In 2015, André Borschberg and Bertrand Piccard flew a record distance of 4,481 miles, 7,211 kilometers, from Nagoya, Japan to Honolulu, Hawaii in a solar-powered plane, Solar Impulse 2. The flight took nearly 5 days. During the nights the aircraft used its batteries and the potential energy gained during the day. 118. On the 14th of July, 2019, Frenchman Frankie Zapata attracted worldwide attention when he participated at the Bastille Day military parade riding his invention, a jet-powered flipboard. He subsequently succeeded in crossing the English Channel on his device on the 4th of August, 2019, covering the 35-kilometer, 22 mi, journey from Sangatte in northern France to St. Margaret's Bay in Kent, UK, in 22 minutes, with a midpoint fueling stop included. 119. 24 July 2019 was the busiest day in aviation, for Flight Radar 24 recorded a total of over 225,000 flights that day. It includes helicopters, private jets, gliders, sightseeing flights, as well as personal aircraft. Few website has been tracking flights since 2006. 120. On the 10th of June, 2020, the Pipistrel Electro became the first electric aeroplane to secure a type certificate from EASA. 121. In the early 21st century, the first fifth-generation military fighters were produced, starting with the F-22 Raptor, and currently Russia, America and China have fifth-gen aircraft. 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the aviation industry due to the resulting travel restrictions as well as slump in demand among travelers, and may also affect the future of air travel. 122. For example, the mandatory use of face masks on airplanes has become a common feature of flying since 2020. 123. Mars. On the 19th of April, 2021, NASA successfully flew an unmanned helicopter on Mars, making it humanity's first controlled powered flight on another planet. The Ingenuity helicopter rose to a height of 3 meters, and hovered in a stable holding position for 30 seconds, after a vertical takeoff that was filmed by its accompanying rover, Perseverance. 124. On the 22nd of April, 2021, Ingenuity made a second, more complex flight which was also observed by Perseverance. 125. As a homage to all of its aerial predecessors, the Ingenuity helicopter carries with it a postage-sized fragment from the wing of the 1903 Wright Flyer. See also Aviation portal. Aviation archaeology.
Yes, let's stop the video. It's just to split. I like to keep it in 5 parts.